Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? Appreciate you coming. I know we are between us and drinks. We contemplated getting shots, so every time we say the word governance, you got to take a shot. But we figured that might get us into a tricky territory before the reception. So we'll keep it kosher for now. But welcome, I appreciate everyone coming. We do want to make this as interactive as possible. So we're gonna call upon you. We want you to call upon us. Let's make this a talking session. So please ask your questions in person. And hello, I'm Susanne Katus, SVP Market Leader at Datamaran. We continue to be on a mission to bring strategic ESG insights to executives so they can make better decisions and make real change. And I am really lucky to work with these esteemed leaders from Clorox, Booz Allen Hamilton, and McDonald's, along with a few other companies I see in the room, Eastman Chemical, for instance, over there. And today, we're gonna be talking about two topics that seem to be very hot right now: AI governance. When I came to GreenBiz years ago, AI was not a topic. When we launched Datamaran 10 years ago, I remember coming to conferences and people saying, "What is it that Datamaran does?" Say, "Oh, we use AI technology to help you prioritize your ESG issues, understand external trends, keep up with regulation." Oh, that sounds a bit odd. But now, I mean, AI is all over this session, this conference, which is exciting. But today, we really want to focus on how can you use AI to support governance. So we're not going to go, or at least we're going to try not to go down the rabbit hole of reporting. We're really going to focus on how can we rethink the infrastructure in-house to make better decisions, which is really the starting point before you can start thinking through disclosure and reporting. And so when I was looking back, I saw that I had authored an article for GreenBiz on diversity, equity, and inclusion disclosures 4 years ago when there was the whole boom towards DE&I. We had Black Lives Matter, right? So there was a lot of spotlight and attention being put on corporates. What are you doing about DE&I? What are you doing about social inclusion? So I thought it would be fun to look at what are companies doing today. In the past 4 years, where have we come from? Because in that article, you'll see the US was really trailing behind Europe when it came to disclosures. But now, one of the things that we're seeing is that, and I'll get back to that slide, just this past year, when we look at disclosures from the S&P 500, 97% of the S&P 500 refer to DE&I in their annual reporting. That's huge. And if you look at the article, which I can share with everyone after this, it was a very small percentage 4 years ago. But the question remains, and this is a question for you, what percentage of these companies actually report out on a time-bound or measurable target for DE&I? Shout your answers. 20%, okay. 15%. 2%. 5%. All right, so.
I'm buying drinks for whoever gets it right.
Yeah, drinks on me. So we see 28% of the S&P 500 have actually reported an associated measurable and time-bound target. So the question remains, what are the other 69% working towards? And that's where we're really here to talk about how we rethink ESG, because ESG is not broken, no matter what media likes to say. This is living proof. It is not broken. It is here to stay. But really, we have to evolve the way that we think about reporting, or about ESG. We have to get out of this reporting rabbit hole. And it's hard, right? Because reporting has gotten us to a good point. I was at Global Reporting Initiative before helping to build Datamaran. We are, all inundated with regulation, CSRD, CS-DDD, SEC. There's a lot of discussion about that, and that matters. But ultimately, really what we're seeing as a connecting thread across all of these different regulatory developments is governance. There are really governance regulations in the guise of reporting regulations. And that's where we have the topic of materiality. So we will talk a little bit about materiality during this session, because materiality really is sort of the bread and butter of how you build those governance discussions. And this is actually a snippet from the Booz Allen Hamilton's latest report, where they talk about materiality as a decision-making process. It is a living process. It is something that they are using to really monitor stakeholder expectations on an ongoing basis and ensure that their strategy doesn't react necessarily to those expectations, but understands what's coming down the pike, and it really helps to defend and validate where you've decided to invest your time and resources. And we see that the concept of materiality is evolving, right? If we look at these regulations that I mentioned, the alphabet soup, and you really break them down, the focus is really on governance, strategy, risk management. Metrics and targets is a component of that. It's an important one, but it is not the central component. If you look at the ESRS disclosure requirements themselves coming out of Europe, 50% of them focus on policies, actions, strategy, targets, not metrics. So that's why we're here today. We're here to get out of that rabbit hole. We're here to talk about what does governance look like. We know it's evolving. It's a maturing space. You bring a lot of best practices, but also learnings that you're going through. And so we want to really dive into that, and we want to talk about how does technology help from a governance perspective? How does technology help in getting the right information into the right stakeholders so you can make better decisions? And so with that, I am excited to introduce Niki King, who heads up sustainability at Clorox. We have Jacob Bernstein, who is Deputy General Counsel, VP, Corporate Secretary at Booz Allen Hamilton. And we have Colleen Wade Spelder, who is Impact Reporting and ESG Governance Director, first time I've seen that in a title, at McDonald's. So, what does ESG governance look like at your companies? Let's really break that down practically, because I think governance it can be a loaded term and it can be very conceptual. So if you could start us off, Niki, how have you been working on governance at Clorox?
Sure. So thank you all for attending. And like Susie said, please ask questions because we want this to be interactive. So I just hit 1 year at Clorox. When I got there, we had an ESG disclosure committee, which was great. We had the framework of a governance structure. So I spent quite a few months putting that governance structure into place. And I'll just break it down. I'll give you all the components. So it starts at the board level. When I got there, I was excited and terrified to learn that I would be reporting to the board every quarter. Never done that before on a quarterly basis. So I report to the NGCRC quarterly, to the full board on an annual basis. Then we have under that an ESG executive committee. So that is our head of human resources, my boss, the chief legal officer, and the 2 business presidents. Why that is so critical to us is because we have an integrated sustainability and business strategy. And implementation of our sustainability goals sits within the business units. So I need those 2 business unit presidents to be on board, bought in, and they need to tell their GMs that, hey, this is really important. So that ESG executive committee, that's our decision-making body. Then under that, we have an ESG steering committee, and that is all of the key stakeholders that are the commitment owners. So it's, heads of R&D, supply chain, our DE&I person, our government affairs. So it's a cross-functional group, and that's really the heart of who is going to look at our materiality assessment and help us with that. And then we have some working groups under that. So we have the ESG Disclosure Committee, we have a Human Rights Working Group, and a few others. So that is how our governance structure is broken down. The other thing that I did, there was a lot of confusion about who's doing what, why do we need this? So I spent the time, it was a very painful process, but I just built a ESG governance playbook. It's very lengthy, but it just spells it out. So when anyone has a question, I just toss it over and say, here's why, here's the how, here are all the charters. So it's, to me, it is an extremely effective process. It is the most robust ESG governance structure that I've seen, and I've been at a few different companies, but it works. I mean, last week I was before the ESG Executive Committee, and we had 4 decisions that needed to be made. And I went into that 1-hour meeting, they were well prepped, and I had my 4 decisions within an hour. So extremely effective.
In the audience, quick question. Who here reports into or is part of an ESG committee at their company that reports up to the board? Okay, so a lot of you. Who here feels there's confusion on what ESG governance is and who owns what? Okay, so shared sentiment. All right, so Jacob, can you elucidate what that looks like at Booz?
Yeah, sure. You know, Booz Allen's a 100-plus-year-old company, but been public for maybe 12. I joined 8 years ago. I didn't know how to spell ESG.
It's tricky.
Yeah. About that. But about 5 years ago, there were little bits and pieces of what is in a modern-day ESG program kind of scattered around the firm. But within legal, which is where I said, obviously, we kind of built the ESG function and called it that. And we had to rename some other things. ESG meant something else at the company, but we renamed all that stuff and put a ESG program in place. And we did it was, from scratch, essentially. So it was very rigid the way we did it. It was very prescriptive. We set up an ESG committee, which was very, very senior level executives. We had an ESG council, which was sort of the leads in the various areas that would kind of do the day-to-day. And the ESG committee would help advise on direction, and ultimately we would go to the board where we amended our charters for the Nominating Corporate Governance Committee so that it had explicit authority over ESG matters, which was a big day for us to do something like that. The audit committee still has oversight, just not anything relating to risk. It's not specifically in the charter, but and the compensation committee has oversight over ESG matters as well as it relates to people, but we don't necessarily spell it out. So the board is very, very much has oversight. But we kind of built the function within legal. It works. It's the only way we've ever done it. And it has given us access from the very, very start to the board. So we were fortunate there. We do brief the board continuously. As secretary, I'm at every meeting, but my head of ESG, at least twice a year, will come to NomGov and brief the board directly. And so, the boards I don't know about other companies, but our company, not that many people go before the board. There's a handful. And so, head of ESG is one of them.
Yeah,
Same for us.
Yeah.
Both of you sit within legal.
Yeah.
Colleen, you have a bit of a different perspective at McDonald's. Can you explain what it looks like there?
Sure. So a couple of years ago, McDonald's, which is a company that's been doing ESG sustainability and doing so in a very public way with public goals and commitments for some time, underwent a bit of an organizational shift, and what was historically very much a supply chain sustainability function, there was a creation of a sustainability and social impact team, Center of Excellence, within our Global Impact function. Global Impact was a brand new function that consisted of teams from government relations, public policy, corporate communications, and then within that, this focused group of experts who were owning strategy across not just sustainability topics, but also human rights, DEI, and with that, there was this opportunity to have ESG governance actually grow out of that team. So I am the Impact Reporting and ESG Governance Director, and our vertical is really responsible for the cross-functional alignment with legal and with finance to build out what a formalized view of governance looks like. So I think that the global impact model is one that is pretty unique. I don't think that we've come across quite as many organizations with that unique structure, having people who really came from global people, supply chain, all working on the same team, reporting into the sustainability and social impact officer, who then reports up to an EVP, global impact leader, who then reports to the CEO. But I think for us, it's been a really excellent opportunity to have this impact reporting and ESG governance work come with a degree of credibility in partnering very closely with the actual experts who lead the strategy. So we've found that that gives us an interesting launching point for conversations with teams like internal audit when we're digging in on our climate disclosures and thinking through, the nuances associated with why, a climate disclosure might have elements of extrapolation incorporated into it, and why that, is a reasonable approach in line with GHG protocol. So I think that, for us, really in the wake of what the SEC was doing a couple of years ago, that was when our finance partners and our legal partners, came and were starting to ask a lot of questions around our reporting and disclosure. That was the starting point for the conversation. And we saw an opportunity to formalize things, formalize our processes, not just around disclosure oversight, but also the internal governance around those public commitments that I just mentioned. And I know we'll talk about that in a bit, but I do think that it's been interesting to see those two things grow together, those processes and formalization of those processes for disclosure oversight and goals and commitments. They're different things, and having to really bring all of our partners along in the nuances around that has been a journey. So I know we'll dive into it more in a minute.
Yeah, it brings up a good point, right? Reporting, and especially now with the focus with regulation, right? It's sort of a trigger. And it's a way to start some of those conversations. For those of you that responded saying you're part of an ESG committee that reports up to the board, by show of hands, how many report up quarterly? Okay, some of us. Twice a year? Okay. Once a year? For more than 20 minutes? All right. Yeah, so it seems like frequency, too, is something that is being worked out. For those of you that are only reporting once a year or twice a year, do you feel like that frequency is going to accelerate? Feel free to shout out yes, no. I don't know. It should. Yeah, it should, right? The pace of change is just drastic, and that's gets us to this idea of AI technology. And actually, in the app, there was a question from someone, I hope you're in the room, that was saying, how do we demystify AI technology for leaders, right? Because AI right now, there's a lot of attention to it. And here we're just gonna really break down, I'd love to hear, how is AI technology really helping to inform your decisions on ESG? What has technology enabled you and your teams to do in order to make better decisions and really, ensure you're investing your time and your resources in the right areas?
Do you want me to kick it off?
Please.
I'll kick it off. If you had asked me this question 6 months ago, I would have probably rolled my eyes and said, I'm not using AI, but I was in reality. It has made my life so much easier. I mean, there are two critical components to my job. It's to create the strategy and to get leadership buy-in. And I'm not going to be successful unless I can do those two things. And AI has really helped me to really, when I'm reporting quarterly, I don't have resources. I have a very small team. 2 of my 4 people are here with me today. So I can't have them continuously doing research and benchmarking and looking what our stakeholders need and how things are evolving and the political landscape. We just don't have the resources, and I don't have an unlimited budget to hire consultants to do that for me. So I am using AI to help pull together the landscape quarterly. We can do it using Datamaran. Yes, that's a plug. But quarterly, I can see how things are trending, and I can present that to the board, and it helps to bring some credibility to what I'm saying. It helps me to be able to inform the ESG executive committee ahead of time if something is trending and I need to bring it to their attention. I can remember way back when, 2010, I don't know, but I would spend hours every week building an emerging issues alert. And it was just digging through media articles and taking it to leadership and saying, hey, these are things that I'm seeing. Now I don't have to do that. I can push a button and it's built for me. So it is all about efficiency. I think it reduces the bias. It reduces the resources that I need, and it allows me to present information in a credible way and quickly.
I think Niki makes a really important point about just like how it can free up the very limited resources that we inevitably all have on our teams to do this work. I think the other point I want to kind of draw out is that, McDonald's Corporation, we are a company that has a lot of in your inbox stakeholder feedback on what issues are most important to various stakeholders, but that isn't always representative of, the broader landscape. And I think that, that this can manifest in a lot of different ways for different companies, whether you're a big name brand or, any company with maybe loud external stakeholders or loud internal stakeholders who are advocating really effectively for their issue, even if that's maybe not the most material issue for your company to be, building out the governance, the risk management, and the strategy around. So I think that having a tool, a data-driven and AI-driven tool that can also be a bit of a third-party perspective in the room can be helpful in trying to broaden the lens a little bit when you are having these conversations with leaders, and leaders themselves can be very tied to driving progress on certain issues for their own reasons. So I think that that's another way to think about the tool is being able to help broaden the lens and get away from just your strategy being driven by any one set of external or internal stakeholders.
Booz Allen is the largest provider of AI to the federal government. So it might be surprising to know that we're kind of in the back office part of the function, the in-house, the corporate part. We don't really directly use AI a lot. We're still at the very beginning stages. We have third-party software such as Datamaran, which has been awesome for us. It's really helped, as my other co-panelists have said, reduce the number of person hours needed to do these tasks. It's most recently, it's speeding up our process. We're about to do another materiality assessment. It helps a lot on the front end there. But in terms of the use case for AI, particularly generative AI, in the sort of back office corporate functions, still being evaluated. It's no doubt going to make a huge difference, but we're just kind of not there yet. Still, I know, Niki, you had mentioned earlier that your company you've already got a sustainable use policy. We're not quite there yet, or a ethical use policy.
We do. We have an AI policy internally, and we launched the policy, and we're able to use Copilot in a very secure way. And I will tell you, that's been life-changing to me. So,
yeah, the data privacy element of it is what is kind of the hard part to get your head around. At least for us.
Yeah, and I think, obviously, just from the tech provider perspectives, there's an ethical question, too, for tech providers to be very transparent about how they themselves are leveraging AI and what are the decisions and methodologies that they make to actually consume this information, process this information, bring it to you in as unbiased a way as possible, right? So, I think it's a fast evolving space, but the transparency element on both sides is going to be so key. And, that's core to the governance side too, right? There's governance in just how tech providers actually leverage AI themselves. Yeah, and you mentioned materiality, and we kind of talked about it at the beginning of this. And I think materiality has evolved from being seen as sort of this project where you stop for 3, 6, 9 months. You get lots of different stakeholders in the room talking about issues that maybe they don't really understand. You get surveys from people who might be having a bad day or ate a bad burger or, hopefully not.
Not here.
Somebody else. Yeah. But now materiality is evolving, right? It's something that really needs to be involved at a decision-making level across the organization. So you mentioned materiality. How is materiality playing into your governance structures around ESG?
I mean, it's a threshold question, right? I mean, we started out with, I think you put it up on the screen, we started out with 26 categories, and then we narrowed it down, and Datamaran helped us do that. And then we talked to our various stakeholders, and we put in our report, I think we've got a list of 14 or 15. But it kind of is a theme that goes throughout the way we think about strategy and our reporting.
Yeah, and I know materiality is evolving too at Clorox.
It is. We're in the middle of that right now. But we were chatting earlier. I remember the first time I did a materiality assessment. Who in this room did one 10 years ago? How long did it take you was months and months. I remember the first one I did was like 9 months. And at the end of the day, it was probably still very biased, right? Because you come out with this matrix and then you're sitting there with your leaders and they're like, yeah, it's not really important. Yeah, it's not really important. So you come out with this really biased materiality assessment. Now we will be doing our materiality assessment and some reframing, and it'll be done in no time. And instead of pulling in our leaders and wasting their time, we're going to go to them and say, hey, here's this unbiased materiality matrix. This is what we think should be our material issues. And yes, no longer, we're not going to have 30, 40 goals. It will be, hey, we need to focus on these 4 things. What do you think? Does this seem right to you? We will bring fact-based materiality to them. And then, we'll still monitor quarterly because this evolving landscape is not going to stop, and we will need to be able to gut check quarterly, but I think it's going to be a much simpler process.
And these are the issues that are most likely to have an impact on long-term, on shareholder return.
Exactly. It's all about that.
Yep.
I think the materiality conversation for us has, do we want to take your question?
Yeah, let's do it.
We can sprinkle
Let's
in
do
questions. Yeah, do you want to just...
Yeah, I'll just quickly add to the how does materiality plug into governance at McDonald's. So like I was saying, a couple of years ago when the SEC was, coming out or warning us that they were going to come out with something, and our finance partners came to the table with zeal and a lot of interest in understanding what sort of governance we had in place, what it looked like, what the state of things was. I think that the formalization of our, like I said, disclosure oversight commitments, oversight and management process, has really been built around how do we work better with finance and with legal? How do we have those more clear roles and responsibilities? And I think that because that's been happening over the last couple of years in line with and in parallel with CSRD and this conversation around double materiality conversation has really been, on understanding what double materiality means for us and recognizing that we are bringing, partners who are experts on the 2 pieces of that to the table and trying to figure out how we have a common language for what double materiality is internally, in recognition of the fact there is no, clear roadmap and checklist for how you do double materiality externally. And so I think that this governance materiality thing has been, linked in with trusting that, finance is bringing some pretty interesting insights to the table on, yes, how does the SEC define, financial materiality? Also, how does that work in practice, within our finance organization? And then our, sustainability and social impact, COE, that has been, managing the ESG strategy for the company, managing our external disclosures for years. How do we think about impact materiality and what are the inputs to those conversations? Like I said, balancing all of the various different in your inbox feedback with, our real opportunities and core capabilities as a business to drive impact. So, I think that we're still in the process of having that conversation, and I think that, as we've talked about, various tools can be helpful and a helpful bridge as we try to have that conversation with functions who are still learning how we all work together and, what our areas of expertise are and how we blend them into this new frontier.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, so I was curious if you could hear more about where you're thinking about removing bias by using this process of doing it more rapidly, iteratively, and then to your point just now around the importance of some of those stakeholder voices and helping to get those gut checks. So I'd love to hear just a little bit more around what got you into a comfortable space around the depths and the work and how you're using that role to understand financial materiality specific to your business, as well as your business's own capacity to drive impact in those spaces of moving into that other side of it, and how you structured it in such a way that you feel that comfort of AI being able to get you that whole picture.
Did everyone hear that? No. Okay. So very Cliff Note version. How did you, Niki, get to a point of comfort in what the outputs from AI were providing when it comes to determining your material issues?
Yeah, so we're just in that process right now, but when I came to the company, I was asked to really take a step back, look at the journey we had been on. which was a great journey. We started doing an integrated report back in 2012. So, we were ahead of the game. But I was asked to really just assess the journey and look at where we want to go. And the first presentation that I did to the NGCRC, I said to them, we've done a great job here. We've laid the foundation. We are leaders in this space. Most people don't know that we're leaders in this space because we're pretty humble. We don't talk about it. But what we needed to do is we needed to become very laser focused. We needed to move from a reactive state to a proactive state and really hone in on the key impacts that we could make. And that resonated so well with, I got a note from the CEO right after, and she's like, that was pretty darn amazing. That's what they wanted to hear. And so there's a comfort level. I was able to build that trust. And so now we're going through that process. And I think what it's going to do for us, for example, we have a lot of passionate people in the company, and they all want to own a piece of sustainability. And we have people who want to set goals. We always want to set goals. They're one-off goals. And so we ended up with this, I don't know how many, we have like 30 goals. They're not all quantitative. Some are qualitative. Some make sense. Some don't make sense. But it's because we have these passionate people. And so I think materiality is going to, take that bias out and allow us to come up with a set of goals that make sense for the company, not just the individuals and their passion areas. And, the board has been excited about that.
Kind of open ask on
Yes.
the AI side of that. What part of the AI is giving you the comfort that rather than a 9-month stakeholder conversation, this is getting
Datamaran. Because it is all, and I will tell you, I had to fight with my boss for several months because she's like, oh, we did a materiality assessment 3 years ago and we don't need to do another one. It was a painful process and I just don't think it's important. And so I had to convince her that no, the landscape is continuously changing. Stakeholder expectations are continuously changing. This regulatory environment is insane. And so we really need to do a fact-based, AI-driven data materiality assessment. And so she finally got it. Susie and I were in the middle of a conversation with her, and she pinged me, and it just clicked. She's like, oh, you're right. That will be fact-based and unbiased. Go for it. In the middle of the conversation. And that's what she wanted to hear, that it was no longer Niki and Lisa and Susie and John telling her the things that we were passionate about. It was all fact-based.
What is your name, the person that asked the question?
Sorry, I'm Meg.
Meg. Susie owes you a drink, Meg, for asking that question.
Can I add something really quickly, Susie, on that? I think that I wouldn't want to position, and I hope you're okay with me saying this, Susie, Datamaran as the be-all, end-all in that the output that it produces when you push a button is what you run with. I think that the team that we've worked with has been very open to working with us to say, I personally believe, and I think that our leadership team believes, that we do want to have a degree of McDonald's stakeholder input incorporated into this. And, I think that having a solution that is evidence-based has been a really helpful, part of pushing our conversation forward to say, you know what, we would like to have this be a portion of our conversation that we're having with our top 10 shareholders. We're going to bring, something for them to react to. We're going to arm the team that's in those conversations with, the right questions to really probe. I don't think that if we had showed up and said, we're doing, a double materiality assessment by hand. There's a lot of surveys and there's a lot of interviews we're trying to do. We're going to try to get all of the inputs we need and to have, an hour-long conversation with each of these top shareholders to get what we need to just create the initial output. I don't think we would have gotten the yes. I think that it's incredibly important in my mind to incorporate and infuse some direct stakeholder feedback into, this product. And the product is designed to account for that. I think another interesting piece, in the face of, these global regulations is, you've got a tool that is, scanning and pulling, and representing your company's disclosures from the perspective of, your global disclosures. But I don't know about you, our markets produce, voluntary ESG reports, and those are based on, the reflection of the conversations that they're having in market about what matters most and what ESG, issues matter most to their, partners in, government affairs and whatnot. And that has been an interesting conversation too. And how do we incorporate those global reports and make sure that the tool is finding and scanning, those pieces so that we have a full reflection of what issues McDonald's Corporation is saying matter most to the company around the world. So I think there's a need to take a critical eye to the inputs, to not just trust it to remove all of the bias and to think critically about where you get those most valuable insights in your maybe traditional by hand is the way I'm describing it, materiality assessment process.
Right.
Yeah.
No, we're the same way, and we will be doing a stakeholder engagement exercise with ours as well, because we want to hear what our investors say, we want to hear what our leaders in the company say, but we will take something to them to react to.
Yeah.
Same here.
Yeah, and I think here it's more about having a solid starting point or a validation or a gut check or perhaps shedding light on something that maybe just wasn't top of mind. So a story to give some context, utilities company that we've been working with for a very long time, I was brought into an executive team meeting to showcase some of the dynamic trends that they were seeing around their materiality analysis. And they were seeing that human rights was an issue that was gaining attention. This was 5 years ago. So we're in front of a utilities company based in the US, their board, their executive leaders, and they're like, human rights? Huh? Why is this an issue that we need to start thinking about? But they were able to deep dive and say, it's because policymaking is emerging in XYZ country. This is something that we see investors are starting to care about. Actually, we see our peers are starting to talk about these issues in their reports too. So it's really about just having that information, right, to build. You brought credibility up. I think it came across all three of you. It's really about enabling the experts in-house to have the process, the controls, the information, because ultimately, and all the regulations say this too, it's up to the company to determine what is or is not material. And is not is really important too, right? Because we can't do it all. So you gotta be mindful of your time and resources. So thinking back about governance, you've talked a lot about who is involved in those processes. What would you say are some of the gaps internally that you're working to fill right now? I mean, Colleen, you kind of shed light on that. Double materiality, you're bringing two disciplines together, finance, accounting, ESG strategy. So obviously accountants don't like gray areas. There's a lot of gray area when it comes to ESG subject matter. But just curious, what are the gaps that you're seeing? How do you see the space evolving? And how are you using technology to help fill some of those gaps?
I'm happy to take some of that. Yeah, I mean, there's some enormous gaps. Like I mentioned, joining the company, I didn't know how to spell ESG. There's still a lot of folks that don't know how to spell it. And on the board, I've found that the best way to handle the board is to get ahead of things and not wait for them to ask you. The board reads, all the boards do, they read really well, really, really well. They have time somehow to read everything that's ever been written on any given day. They serve on other boards. And by the way, we track every board they sit on. We look at what they're doing because we might get the same question. But to get ahead of that and to kind of come to them, and I view the corporate secretary's office as kind of the in-between between management and the board. I mean, as technically, legally, we are management. The board is the board. They have fiduciary duties. They oversee management, but we kind of help them oversee what we view as management. And you build a layer of trust there. And just for an example, in terms of an ESG topic, think about clawback policies, for example. Interests are not aligned there. No, that's not good for any management member. Clawback does one thing. It only does bad things to management in the event that it ever gets triggered. But you get ahead of that before the SEC requires it, which they just did, and you have a clawback policy in place. You're kind of the impartial, neutral third party, sort of, and you bring it to the board, and you're representing management, you're representing the board, and you put it out there, and you kind of build this level of confidence. And then the board starts to trust the company and the corporate secretary's office that you're doing what needs to be done. They're not all read up on ESG topics. Some of them will be really, really focused on it. Others, maybe they don't care so much. But there's big, big gaps.
I think that for us, it's been more creating like a shared language. So it's less of like a skills gap and more of a lack of being able to speak the same language about, things like oversight of, your disclosure process for, finance and development of the 10K, the proxy, what are the norms that, they expect to see, in our impact reporting, and disclosure oversight governance. And, from a materiality standpoint, like we've talked about, how does the company, interpret these norms around financial materiality, SEC definitions, what does that look like within, our finance organization? How does that show up in our, 10K risk factor disclosures? How do we, have a common understanding around, all of those concepts so that we can then chart a course, like I said, into this new frontier that I think every company is trying to figure out what it looks like for them. How do you blend these two concepts that are like fairly, financial materiality, it's obviously well established. Impact materiality, I think companies have been doing it, in alignment with the same set of principles, but how does it, look for each individual company and create that kind of language together?
I mean, yes, and I would say my bigger challenge is not at the board level. We have a very engaged board, and I am surprised every time I go in there, the questions that they ask me. So really good at the board level, really good at the executive level. I would say this is probably the first time that I haven't had to fight with my executives over this. I think for me, it's deeper in the organization. It's my head of supply chain. It's, some other VPs in the organization, my general managers in the business units that I'm having to educate. So that's the bigger issue for me.
Just by a show of hands, who here feels their board needs more education? A lot. How about executive level? Yeah, okay. So generally education, right? I see you've raised your hand.
Thank you. I wanted to follow up. Actually, your comment was pushing in the direction I wanted to ask about. A lot of the comments y'all have made so far have been about using technology for reporting and analysis and oversight and data gathering. But when I think about governance and leadership, I also think of the direction downward of ensuring that policies actually get acted upon and implemented. And I wondered if any of you had experiences to share about using technology successfully or unsuccessfully in that side of things.
That's a great question. Trying to think of how to tie this to AI, except for using Copilot to help me write the policies, which it will, and it's great at that. I mean, we've had some, I've found some gaps, right? So, for example, like the regulatory process. With all of these regulations, and it's not just ESG reporting, it's plastics, it's human rights, it's all these policies across the board. And so I'm like, okay, who is managing this? Who's monitoring the regulations? Who is assessing the regulations? Who's responsible for compliance with all these regulations? So right now I'm in the process of using AI and an internal team to really help us write the correct policy for managing that internally and putting the processes in place. So that's one example.
I can't say that we've used, we're not at the stage yet where we've been able to, tack on a technology, a technology to satisfy the business case that I think that you're outlining. But I do think that we had a similar situation where we realized we needed to build out a policy with much more consistent and formal processes around managing, the execution of those public goals and commitments. There was a lot of great, thinking and information captured through our reporting process, but it was too knitted in with our reporting process, and we needed to separate it a little bit so that there was more, ongoing conversation and governance and laddering up to, leadership through those, established channels, not just updates on the goals, but when we were running into methodology changes or, issues that were surfacing related to a goal or concerns around, an ability to continue progressing at pace and the need for more resources to then, ensure that we didn't run into issues in completing the goal on time. That was really, where this policy, need came about, not just for disclosure oversight. And I think this year, we're actually starting to have more mature conversations around, all right, now that we have established processes, now that legal, finance, everyone kind of knows where they fit in that, how do we automate these pieces? How do we use, the need for, enhanced data gathering and data collection to be prepared for the assurance requirements that are coming, related to these reporting regulations that we see cropping up? How do we leverage that, solution that we're going to inevitably need to build to gather all of that data to also build in more, predictive type requirements to the data system that we're ultimately going to have? So I think that I don't necessarily see like the reporting regulations. I'm going to frame it in that way, knowing there's a broader set of ESG regulations, but I don't see the reporting regulations as necessarily a way to get us away from the strategy. I think that we all agree, I hope, that reporting doesn't drive strategy drives reporting. So, I think that these reporting regulations, though, create opportunities for us all, hopefully, to get more momentum and resources behind the data solutions and data systems that we need. And then once you have that buy-in, yes, you're developing it to satisfy these, pending regulations, but you can hopefully build in those business requirements to the system that enable you to have more, predictive insights and things like that to then drive, and understand where those gaps might be in your strategies.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point because we're sort of at this point now where it's the ESG tech stack that's being built, right? Finance has a tech stack, marketing has a tech stack. Now is the time for the ESG tech stack. And there are so many tech solutions now that have come onto market. I'm sure many of your inboxes are very full. And, it's the responsibility of tech providers to be very clear about the problems that we help you solve, because it's not your job to sift through all of these different solutions to find the right provider. And actually, we had an interesting conversation about this at last year's GreenBiz, where we brought some tech providers together to help clarify that. But there's a lot more work to be done because, to your point, there's so many ways that technology can just enable and support from top down, bottom up. All right, we've got time for another question. Yep. I know both of you, so let's try to get both of you then. Yeah.
I'm going to ask a very basic question that gets to some of the issues that you just talked about. Now, Jacob, you said you can't spell ESG. I can't spell AI. I have no idea what a tech stack is. I can talk ESG all day long. I can't talk tech. I have no idea what a tech stack is. Which brings me to this question. What really is AI? Is AI a sticker on some existing software technology, and they're simply calling it AI now? Or is it ChatGTP that is actually something? I don't understand what AI is in the ESG context. Can you help me understand that?
The answer is yes.
Thank you. We're done. Beer time.
It's probably a good conversation over beer.
Yeah. I wish our CTO was here because, when AI started to become big, Gen AI, we like to joke at Datamaran, we're generative AI. He was saying this is like 10 years ago, it was all data driven. And now it's all AI. I mean, obviously, if you get down into the technology of things, it's just different ways of consuming information and making sense of it all. And so from a Datamaran standpoint, it's just about bringing all of these different external perspectives together to help identify patterns, to help identify material issues, to help keep track of regulation, to help understand, if a company talks about human rights in a context of a policy, what are the key points there? I'll have to connect you with our CT. Are you connected with Jerome already? I know you're connected with Donato, but... Okay, I'll connect you to Jerome. He has some good insights.
But once you figure out what it is and how to use it, it's pretty darn amazing.
It definitely means different things to different people, and there is the element of sticking a banner on things.
Yeah.
That is true. I mean, we have procurements all over the federal government. We're 97% of our revenues from the federal government, and we'll get, these generals and people that are procuring for the government say, okay, I want you to do all that stuff, but I want you to make it AI too.
Yeah, and I think, we talked about bias.
That's very common.
We talked about bias a little bit, right?
Yeah.
AI, the hallucinations that we see with ChatGPT, a big component of that is like, what are the sources that you're looking at and what are the prompts that you're giving it, right? So ultimately, you want to partner with people that know how to ask the right questions, that really do due diligence on the methodology that they're using and are on the sources that you're looking at too. So I appreciate the engagement from all of you, especially you three. Thank you for your honest point of views.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Did anyone keep a tally on how often we said governance, how many shots we need to take? Okay. See you at the bar.